Chris here with RackUp+Go, and today we're going to be discussing some rooftop air conditioning test results that we had performed at a third-party lab. These are all going to be 12-volt DC units, and we're going to find out which one's most efficient. Let's get into it. In front of me, we've got various components that make up a 12-volt rooftop air conditioner. In fact, these are going to make up just about every air conditioner. We've got our condenser fan, we've got an evaporator fan, we have our evaporator. This is what's going to produce the cold air. We have one section of a condenser here, and then we've got our compressor. So basically, the way this all works, everything's all connected with copper tubing. The compressor is going to do exactly as its name refers to, compress the gas that's inside there, cause it to build up pressure, send it through the system. It's going to turn it into a liquid in the condenser, and then it goes through an expansion valve and turns to a gas in the evaporator. And when it changes from liquid to gas, you get a cooling effect, and that's why the evaporator gets cold. And this is where all the air is going to be passing through here. When this gets cold enough and starts to cause water to condense, that's how you're going to remove humidity out of the air. And then the condenser is actually your hot side. The condenser is basically trying to cool that gas back down, condense it back into a liquid to go through the compressor all over again. And then we've got our evaporator fan. This is going to be responsible for moving the air in the space. So pulling it through the evaporator, pushing that cold air into your RV, into your van, whatever you've got it installed on. And then we've got our condenser fan. The condenser fan is mainly just to pull air through this condenser. So as the gas is winding back and through here, it's cooling off and starting to kind of like pull that heat out of the system, if you will. And so all of these components are crucial to a well-functioning AC. Now, some are going to be able to do it a little bit better than others, and that's what we've kind of gone through and done in these tests, is to figure out, you know, who's building a really solid 12-volt rooftop air conditioning unit. So we've got some test results over here on the laptop. We'll go through the results of each of these units. We've got 5 units on here. We've got the Dometic RTX 2000, the Velit 2000R. We've got a Premier Products Turbo Air 2, an Indel B Plein Aircon, and then the Nomadic X3. The premise of the test started with a chamber that was approximately the size of an extended wheelbase van. Most of our customers that are putting these units on their vehicles are extended wheelbase vans, so we wanted to kind of replicate that. We started from 100-degree ambient temperature, and then each unit was set to 75 degrees Fahrenheit, and we monitored how quickly they pulled it down to 75, whether they made it to 75. We also monitored relative humidity. Now, humidity is a little bit harder to control in such a closed space like that without introducing, you know, some other type of heat source or some other cooling source, if you will, with a dehumidifier. So there are some differences in the starting point for relative humidity. However, you'll notice in the test results that each one of these, humidity did rise, and what we're looking for in these test results is a drop-off in the humidity, where we know that this evaporator is getting cold enough to cause the water vapor in the air to start to condense and actually be removed from the chamber space. All right, guys, so we're gonna get into a bit of a technical discussion here. So if you're looking for the quick and easy results, jump ahead. Otherwise, stick around and we're gonna get into the weeds. Let's get started. All right, guys, so we'll start off with the interior ambient air temperature versus the runtime. You'll notice everything's kind of starting around this 100-degree point up here. And then we've got a nice pull down for the majority of these units, other than, you'll notice the purple line, the Indel B. It struggled for a little bit in order to start working, I guess, and pulling this down. But these little flags I have on here, this is actually the temperature after 1 hour. So you'll notice we have a really strong performer with the RTX 2000, pulling it down almost to the set point, 78 degrees after an hour. Turbo Air 2 at 81, the Velit at 82, the Nomadic X3 at 85, and the Indel B, like I said, struggled, so we're only at 91.4. On the far right, these flags are actually the total runtime. So each unit was powered by one 200 amp hour lithium Victron battery. So this is kind of the expected runtime you would get out of one 200 amp hour battery. Now, We did also do some calculations to see how much longer it would run on an additional 200 amp hours, which was basically taking its power consumption once it got down to its steady state here, and then taking that power and dividing it into the amp hours in order to get how long it would run. So since they're not having to pull this down, an additional 200 amp hours would get you longer than, say, this 218 minutes or 221 minutes here. The longest running unit was the Dometic RTX 2000 at 287 minutes. So that's 4 hours and 47 minutes. So you're getting almost 5 hours of runtime out of a 200 amp hour battery. Incredibly impressive. Also very impressive is this Velit 2000R coming in at 256 minutes, 4 hours and 16 minutes. And it's impressive because this Velit 2000R is a relatively new unit on the market. It's also about half the cost of the Dometic RTX 2000. So when it comes to value, that Velit is a really impressive unit. Now the Turbo Air 2 performed pretty well as well. I mean, it ran for a little bit less time than the other two units. The one thing I will say about the Turbo Air 2 is it's quite large. On the roof, when it takes up roof space, if you're looking to do like solar in addition to an AC, that Turbo Air 2 is going to definitely take up some extra real estate. The Indel B is quite small. It's I would say a cute little unit, but we only ran for 221 minutes with that. And the Nomadic X3, roughly the same size as the Velit and the Dometic RTX 2000, was only 3 minutes behind that at 218 minutes. And it also didn't really get down to the set point. It pretty much averaged right around that 85 degrees after it hit that 1 hour mark. What's interesting with this Indel B and the Nomadic X3 unit is they are very close. And I thought this was too close to be a coincidence, and come to find out, looking into it, the X3 is actually made by Webasto or Indel B. So it's a little bit unsurprising when you take a look at like the Indel B made by the same company that the X3 is made by or contract manufactured by. So the results are very similar. All right, let's pop over to relative humidity. You'll notice we have like different starting points here. And like I said earlier, having a consistent relative humidity at the start, you're gonna have to have some sort of dehumidifier, some other device that's kind of controlling the humidity in there. So this is kind of just wherever the chamber was when it was sealed up. The important thing to note though is we see a rise in pretty much all instances. Other than the Indel B, it stayed relatively flat, and that's because it really wasn't starting to cool for that first period of time. So the reason that we see a rise, and a pretty steep rise, is the chamber is sealed, and so the air temperature, as that starts to drop, the water vapor content in the air doesn't really change until the unit starts to remove it. So that water vapor starts to condense. In other words, the evaporator gets cold enough, the water vapor content in the air is high enough that it starts to condense on the evaporator, and that's why you see the water droplets coming out of your unit and coming outside. So when it's doing that, it's actually taking the water vapor that's inside your space, or inside the chamber in this case, and getting it to the outside. Now, Turbo Air 2 didn't really do so well. It kind of climbed the entire time. Same thing with the X3, as well as the Indel B. Two units that kind of stood out. We've got the Velit 2000R, and it did climb, but we did have a great drop off. And so this really started to control the humidity in the space after about 3 hours. So it took a little bit of time. And then we've got the Dometic RTX 2000. Took a little bit less time, but the change wasn't quite as dramatic. And so relative humidity is going to play an important role in how comfortable the space is. So despite the Nomadic X3 being a lower relative humidity, same thing with the Indel B, same thing with the Turbo Air 2, the water vapor content inside the air is going to be a little bit higher. It's going to make it, or a little bit lower. So it's going to make it feel clammier because the temperature is warmer and the water vapor content is actually higher when you break that out. So relative humidity is based on a relation to temperature. The water vapor content is just a raw number. And so the water vapor content in the air at 75 degrees up here with the RTX 2000, and it's at like 38% humidity, that's actually gonna have less water vapor content in the air than, say, this Nomadic unit that's sitting around 27% humidity and 85 degrees. But the Velit did extremely well pulling that relative humidity down, which again makes this a great value, being like half the cost of the RTX 2000. It was able to pull the temperature down. As we saw over here on this graph, we're actually able to get to, or very close to, our set point of 75 degrees, and it started removing the humidity. So all around, just a great performing unit. All right, let's move off relative humidity and switch over to just some raw data numbers here. So we can take a look at our peak current that we're pulling in for each of these units here on the top row. You'll notice the Dometic RTX was pretty low at 51.9 amps, and our high current winner is a Nomadic X3 at almost 90 amps. That is a ton of power. So peak power, looking at these numbers, we've got 673 watts for the RTX, 665 for the Velit, 696, almost 697 for the Premier Turbo Air 2, 677 for the Indel B, and then a whopping 1,160.8 watts for that Nomadic X3. So it's chewing through a ton of power. And you'll also notice it didn't really cool that well. It only got down to about 85 degrees and didn't really do anything for the humidity. So where's all that power going is the big question here. Now, looking at the average current, we've got 40 amps for the RTX, and this is going to be by far the most efficient unit. Did a great job cooling it down, a reasonable job pulling out the humidity, and it is just a power sipper. And in a few minutes, we'll get into some of these components and why it's able to draw such a low amount of current and maintain the temperature in there. The Velit, pretty impressive as well at 45.5. The Turbo Air 2, 50.4. So not a huge difference between, its peak current and where its average current was. And then the Indel B, 50.5, very similar. And then the Nomadic X3 at 53.4. Now, average power, this includes the pull down. So this, when it's pulling down, it's working really hard, starting from that 100-degree temp and getting down to 75, we're including that segment. So the Dometic, another clear winner here at 517.7. The Velit, 586. Turbo Air 2, 648. Indel B, 647. And the X3, using the most at 688 watts. Now, after the pull down, and this is where I was doing some of the calculations for how much longer would the unit run on 200 amp hours. It's already at temperature. This is how much power you could expect it to pull on average with like 100-degree ambient temperature outside. So the RTX was at 458 watts. Velit was at 607. Turbo Air 2 is at 678. And the Indel B, 666. And then the X3 was at 634 watts. So these numbers were used in order to calculate how much an additional 200 amp hours would give you in terms of runtime. Low current, obviously this is going to be the lowest point in which, so where it's not working super hard, it's kind of just maintaining temp, and then low power. And so you can notice the RTX 2000 got all the way down to 352 watts. And that's probably where it kind of hit its stride right after the pull down and kind of relaxed a little bit, gave itself a breath, and then realized, I got to work a little bit harder, and that's where the average power after pull down is up to 458 watts. So it started working a little bit harder once it realized, all right, I got to keep working, I got to keep cooling down. So now the 1 hour temp we've got recorded here on this line. So 78 for the RTX, 82 for the Velit, 81.3 for the Turbo Air 2. 91.8 for the Indel B, and then 85.3 for the X3. And I also wanted to see, all right, so how much time would it take to actually get it down to temperature? And so for the RTX 2000, it's going to be 86 minutes. And remember, the set temp was 75 degrees. The Velit 2000R took about 140 minutes, so a little over 2 hours. And then the Turbo Air 2 took pretty much exactly 2 hours and 120 minutes. Now the Indel B and the Nomadic X3 never got to the set temp of 75 degrees, so they get a nice NA. DNF for those two. Moving over to some of these cost comparisons. So, the RTX is running about 3,100 MSRP. That's with the install components, and freight is not included in any of these numbers, so keep that in mind. And then the Velit 2000R, like I said, is about half the cost at about $1,600. Turbo Air 2, tough to find a retail price, so that's a little blank right now, but Indel B is around $3,000, and then Nomadic X3 is coming in at almost $4,800. So you kind of have to wonder, like, all right, does price really reflect the power and efficiency and the, quality of the unit? Starting to ask those questions now. Cooling capacity, so the Dometic RTX 2000 is rated at 2,000 watts, and so 2,000 watts, it's 3,812 BTUs per hour per 1,000 watts, so double that, 6,824 BTUs per hour. The Velit 2000R is rated at 8,000 BTUs an hour. Turbo Air 2 is an insane 22,000 BTUs per hour. That is a crazy number. The Indel B, very modest at 4,100 BTUs an hour. And then the Nomadic X3 at 11,830 BTUs per hour. Now you'll notice the BTUs per hour and the cooling capacity, at least what they're claiming, doesn't really exactly relate to how well this unit's gonna perform. So just keep that in mind. We've got the 1 hour pull down from 100, we've covered that. Runtime on 200 amp hours, that was on that initial graph, our max current. Whether there's a heat pump, an active shutter ADB. So ADB is air distribution box, and active shutter is actually gonna be like oscillating vents. And so the Velit 2000R actually has an ADB fascia that can bolt up just like a standard RV air conditioner. And those vents will actually articulate and help distribute the air along the length of the van, and they'll move as the unit's running to help distribute the air. So the additional runtime on 200 amp hours, again, this was the average power once it was pulled down, because obviously the first 200 amp hours is going to be used and consumed to help pull it down. So we've got 5 hours and 35 minutes of additional runtime on the RTX, 4 hours and 13 minutes on the Velit, 3 hours and 46 minutes on the Turbo Air 2, 3 hours and 50 minutes on the Indel B, and then 4 hours and 2 minutes on the X3. And I just wanted to see, all right, for the additional cost of each 200 amp hour battery, how much would it cost to get to an 8-hour runtime? So the 3 hours and 38 minutes of the X3 plus the 4 hours and 2 minutes doesn't get you to 8 hours. So you're gonna need 2 additional batteries at an additional cost of $2,610. Bringing your total cost, if you wanted an 8-hour runtime with an X3, to $7,389. Now, Indel B also needed 2 extra batteries for a total of 600 amp hours, so that's $5,600. The Velit 2000R, just an exceptional value here. You need 1 extra 200 amp hour battery, so a total of 400 amp hours to get your 8-hour runtime, and that's only gonna ring you out about $2,904. Not bad. The RTX also only needs 1 additional battery, and that's coming in at $4,404.97. A little specific there, but I also wanted to see, all right, what's the expected runtime if they all had 600 amp hours? RTX is gonna get you almost 16 hours. You're gonna be almost 13 hours with the Velit, 11 hours with the Turbo Air 2, 11 hours with the Indel B, and almost 12 hours with the X3. And a lot of questions come up about noise. And there's some claim noise ratings, there's some, independent tests and things like that. So we decided to actually just measure the decibel rating at about 28 inches in a van. That's probably actually a little bit more than how far your head's gonna be from this thing if you're standing up in it, but that's the number that we chose to go with. So for the RTX, you're at 66 decibels. Velit 2000R is gonna come in at 72. Turbo Air 2 at 78. A little bit noisy. Indel B is going to be 71, and then the X3 is about 74. So in a typical conversation like this video, you're probably going to be around 65 dB. So a conversation, so the RTX is about conversational volume versus like a Turbo Air 2 or the X3 being up there in the 70s, mid to high 70s. It's going to be closer to like a vacuum cleaner running. So a little bit more noticeable, I would say, when you're going to be in a van in small space like that. All right, guys, here's the quick overview of the results. We've got our 5 units here, the RTX 2000, Velit 2000R, Turbo Air 2, Indel B, and the Nomadic X3. You'll notice on this graph, we've got a couple flags. This is going to be the temperature after 1 hour. So we've got 78 for the RTX, 81 for the Turbo Air 2, 82 for the Velit, 85 for the X3, and 91 for the Indel B. On the right-hand side, these flags are indicating the total runtime. So we've got 218 minutes for the Indel B, or sorry, for the X3, 221 minutes for the Indel B, 230 minutes for the Turbo Air 2, 256 minutes for the Velit, and 287 minutes for the RTX. You'll also notice the position of these lines on here, that 3 of them got pretty darn close to their 75-degree set point. RTX was definitely the top performer here, getting right down to that 75. And then we've got 2 that are not quite making it there. The Indel B and the X3 kind of hovering around 85. So if you're looking for the best value in terms of getting the temperature down and also doing it quickly, and also for the longest runtime, the RTX 2000 is going to be your winner. If you're looking for something that's potentially a little bit less performing in terms of how quickly it pulls down in runtime, but is quite a bit less expensive, the Velit 2000R is going to be the one for you. All right, guys, let's talk a little bit about the components again. So building a highly efficient and well-performing AC unit isn't just about slapping an evaporator and condenser and some fans and a compressor together. Each of these components works with the other. So, you can have a huge evaporator, but if your condenser's not large enough, it's not going to cool properly. You can have a huge condenser and a smaller evaporator, and that's also not going to cool properly. You can have fans that are, slowly blowing air over the evaporator, and the air that's coming out is super cold, but it's not moving a large volume of air through the space, so it's not going to cool very quickly. You can have a massive compressor, but if your expansion valve isn't sized right, or the amount of refrigerant you have in the system isn't dialed in perfectly, it's not really going to do you any good, and it's kind of the law of diminishing returns here. The other thing with these components is you can find, just straight up compressors that are either on or off. You have fans that are maybe have 3, maybe 4 speeds that you can control. With the RTX, one of the reasons it's so efficient is, one, it's a very well properly designed cooling system, and that's where one of the benefits of going with a company like Dometic that has years and years of experience, huge R&D budgets, test labs, to be able to test and really figure out what's the most efficient combination. What makes the Dometic RTX, I think, more efficient than some of these other units is their choice of a variable speed compressor. This thing ramps up and ramps down as it needs to. It's not running at one speed and running all the time. It's also better for the electrical system because when it turns on, you don't have this huge power draw. It slowly ramps up and builds up current. Now the fans, like I said, you can get fans with 3, 4 speeds, and for like an evaporator fan, like this one here, the air that's actually circulating the air inside the volume that you're trying to cool, it's kind of handy to have like 3 or 4 set speeds. And so that one is going to be programmed to have like, high, medium, and low. Your condenser fan, now this is a brushless DC motor, so this can actually change the amount of flow of air through the condenser as needed. So as it's monitoring evaporator temperatures, it's monitoring condenser temperatures, and it's making adjustments in real time in order to maximize the energy that's being used. And so that's one of the main reasons why the RTX 2000 performs so strongly and is such an energy miser. This thing, I was super impressed with the results of the RTX, and it just goes to show the prowess of Dometic and their years and years of experience in designing cooling systems. All right, guys, thanks for tuning into this relatively long AC test results video, but we had a lot to cover, a lot of important information, and there are a lot of questions that I think we answered in this video as to what's the most efficient unit, which one uses the least amount of power, which one is good at cooling. So I think we did a really good job. If you have any questions, comment down below or hit us up at customercare@RackUp+Go.com. We'll be happy to answer your questions and dive deeper into the results if you're looking for those answers. And remember, life's an adventure. Rack up and go.